Welcome to the Bladtcast, and I'll tell you something about the Bladtcast. The Bladtcast is good, but it could be better. And then the way to make the Bladtcast better is to bring in the Council of Jeffs. I am Christian Blatt, as always. We'll be joined a little later, allegedly, by Will Starling. But with me right now, the one, the only, the Mr. Jeff Duray, a.k.a. Duray Jeff. How are you, sir?
Hey, actually, there's a second Jeff Duray. He's like a chemical engineer out in Arizona, and he's not Breaking Bad.
He's like a legitimate chemical engineer. And from his Chris Christopherson tribute act, as we were talking prior to the show, and if you're not watching the video version, you're going to really miss out on the visual of this. Yes, the long-lost cousin to the brothers Gibb, the one, the only, Mr. Jeff Winstead.
Howdy, everybody. Good to be back.
I thought it was Black Suit Superman.
Oh yeah, the mullet Superman. This is Superman's cousin from the wrong side of the tracks in Krypton. It's like he's got the long hair, he's got the facial hair, and he's got a leather jacket.
Oh yeah.
So we're here. Speaking of Superman, oddly enough, we're here to talk about one of the most controversial things that happened over the last month. I would say America and the world is really divided over this. Yes, I'm talking about Wonder Woman 1984. And honestly, I don't know if the world is as divided on it. I think there is the scales of justice outside of the Hall of Justice tip largely in one direction. Although I know that our friend Sam Whitfield has talked about how he liked the movie. Rob Lorich, who a lot of people know who listen to this show, he says it's his favorite DC movie. He doesn't like most of them. He liked it more than the first one. And I hear that, and I just think, well, that's crazy talk. I mean, opinion is whatever people want it to be. But I don't know. I thought that the first Wonder Woman was great. It is so far and away the best of all of these DC movies to me. I always thought that. Jeff Duray, your thoughts on the original Wonder Woman before we dive into 1984?
I loved the original Wonder Woman. I was a big fan of it. Couple things. First of all, immediately when I was like not loving this movie, the thought went through my mind like, oh no, there's not a giant male supporting cast and I don't like it as much. Does that make me a misogynist? Two.
The answer is yes.
As far as Lorich loving it, I could totally see that making sense because my impression of Lorich is somebody who has massive nostalgia for the 80s, and the movie is basically crafted to be an 80s movie. So it would make sense that it might appeal to those things that because it was like rewatching it the second time, it sticks out like a sore thumb how everything you're seeing is hokey and stupid, but it's actually pretty much because it's supposed to be an 80s movie. And that's exactly how they worked in the 80s movie.
Because as I'll talk a little bit more about as we go along, my wife and I saw it at a drive-in because I preferred to see, a big first run movie on a bigger screen instead of, at home or on my Apple Watch or whatever. And so in the middle of it, she turned to me and was like, so just because it's set in the 80s, they thought that they should make a shitty 80s action movie. And I'm like, well, I guess so. I guess that was, I understand trying to capture that spirit. And look, for every day of my life, I will defend the great 80s movies like Die Hard 1, but only one. Full
Metal Jacket.
Yeah. I mean, that Full Metal Jacket. I mean, we should do a whole show on that because it's two movies. There's the boot camp movie, and then something very shocking happens, and then it's a completely different movie, and both movies are great.
The Rio had enough Rio.
yeah. Wilson Fisk had enough Rio. But we'll talk a little bit about that. So we're in agreement that Wonder Woman 2017, as we can call that, was really well done. I thought that they really made us care about the character. I thought she was so well handled on screen. The supporting cast was great. What did you think of the original Wonder Woman, Jeff Winstead?
Yeah, I liked it well. It fell apart a bit in the last act. But other than that, I thought it was a strong, good
Well,
character development.
that's just because you feel personally that the wrong side won World War One. And
yeah,
look,
there's
that's
that.
fine
I
that you
mean,
feel
of
strongly
course,
about
yeah,
that.
yeah.
You were like,
But
no, she's helping the wrong side.
yeah, and the reason that movie worked, if the movie was nothing else but that scene of her coming up out of the trench for the first time, like that was an awesome scene. It made the whole movie,
Yeah.
and there was really nothing like that in this one. Like, there's not a single scene in this sequel that I would go back and rewatch because it was just an awesome scene. Like Batman Returns is a good example. Like, it's not a great movie watched in whole, but if you
You're
just want to go
talking
back
about
and
the second Tim Burton movie,
yeah,
right?
the Tim Burton was key to
Yeah,
the second
sure.
one. Yeah, it's like the plot's all over the place. But if you want to go back and parachute into a scene, the scenes actually hold up pretty well. They're very enjoyable.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. There are some of the Marvel movies that aren't my favorite that have great pieces in them, and I think even some of the DC movies that I don't like, even Suicide Squad has like great sequences within it. It is just bubble wrapped around, just blatant shit. So it's just like packed in, surrounded by all this nonsense.
Yeah. But to
and
Jeff's
just
point, like the first movie did have a better supporting cast. Like the supporting cast felt more realistic. It was more rounded out. That was really lacking in this. The characters felt sort of like one-dimensional.
And our friend Raging Rhino agrees with Jeff Prime, who is Jeff Winstead. Hadn't thought of that, Jeff. That's a good take, sort of what you were saying there. I don't know. I think it came up on the screen for those that are watching the video. There he is. And then also, just to backtrack a second, he gives Jeff Winstead credit for looking more like Chris Cornell. For Raging Rhino's sake, we can call you Spoon Man the rest of the way if we like. But
differentiate between Jeffs.
Yeah, this movie is very, very different. And I remember in the lead up to it, it became apparent once you had the trailers that for some reason Chris Pine was going to be in it. And my wife's, one of the things she really liked about the first one when we talked about it after we saw it was that she really liked Chris Pine in it. She thought he was like, he really added a lot of Steve Trevor. And after this one, she was like, I was excited that he was going to be in it again, but he shouldn't have been in this. It just doesn't work. And I think that this is a movie, Wonder Woman 1984, that for me had what I will call actually a great superhero first act, an okay second act, and then just like the third act, you'd been plugging the holes in the dam, and then all of a sudden it just all came rushing out, and you're like, oh no. This just didn't work. And I thought comparatively, Kristen Wiig was great in the first act, good in the second act. And then once she turns into like, Cheetah of like Jungle Cruise Cheetah, I don't even quite know what they were going for. I was like, oh, I wish she'd stopped being in the movie by that point. But Jeff DeRay, just sort of overall, and we're going to break it down. And at some point we should have Will with us and we'll talk more about it. And it's funny because it's like almost as though knowing that I just teased the fact that he was still going to become on and joining us a little bit. The one, the only Will Sterling. But we're just starting to talk big picture right now. So Jeff DeRay, overall Wonder Woman 1984 thoughts.
Well, so my thoughts upon trying to rewatch it for a little bit was that it's basically, you remember those stupid parody movies? It's basically that 80s movie. Because it turned into an 80s homage, it just turns into bad parody because it's like, oh, am I supposed to excuse this really poorly written scene where there's no motivation for anybody to do any of the things they do because it's 80s? Like, it was just hard. Like, again, rewatching a lot of the opening scenes, there was more stuff I was picking up on that was just like, I felt like it led to my frustrations throughout the film. So you have the second beginning where they're in the mall. She's dressed in full Wonder Woman garb, right? So totally exposing her identity, not hiding it in the slightest. Then it's like you have a cop pointing his gun at the robbers as they're running up the escalator, and also clearly pointing at a bunch of civilians, which they wouldn't do. The cop does nothing but just stands there and yells, "Freeze!" while they continue to run up the escalator. Then after they're up the escalator, have a clear shot of leaving, he grabs the little girl to dangle her over the balcony. For no fucking reason. None of it has any reason. There's none, just stupid. It's just stupid all the way through. So that was the kind of stuff that made me go like, why is this movie happening right now? And it's like, I think one of the things that everybody loved about the first movie was playing off this naivety of the character, right? Like, oh, she's in the real world now. I understand we have to move away from that, but it's like, now she's a snooty bitch. Over 60 years, she's pining for a guy who's dead. So the first lesson we learn is learn to accept the truth and let things go. 60 years of not getting over a guy you knew for 6 weeks. Being like, not wanting to even talk to other guys. One guy's like, hey, would you like to share a cab? Don't talk to me. Like, what the fuck is going on? And then you look in her apartment, all the pictures they show, she's just exposing her identity wantonly. Then there's a news broadcast that explains that there's been sightings of her like multiple times over the last year. And that's just one of 60 years. So just the whole movie's about how, hey, everyone should have known she exists. At the end, we also, when she talks to everybody in the world, you probably should have known she existed, Bruce Wayne, because you were alive at this time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just like a lot of this stuff just doesn't line up. I would understand if we were saying like, hey, this is a totally separate world from the Justice League, but it can't be. You introduce this character in a movie for this like continued universe that you're saying like, go fuck itself. And that just like, at this point, you can't do that. You know, you're too far down the rabbit hole to just be throwing everything out and being like, yeah, that was inconvenient for our plot devices. So well, I think that there was just a lot of stuff that rubbed me the wrong way. Sure. And there was a lot of stuff missing that I thought really, I don't know. It just felt like a movie made by people who were thought their shit thing. Right? Like, it's just a lot of like, look how great I am. Well, I don't know how to get over a guy, but I'm always fabulously dressed and posing like a model in all these old-timey pictures. Like, what the fuck?
And by the way, I was just thinking how the dog barking could have been any of the three of you, because you all have dogs. So whoever's dog
was mine. That's
no. We are very pup friendly here. Yes. Something that Will missed out on what we were talking about is sort of this observation my wife had as we were watching it, that just because it's set in the 80s, did they think that they needed to make a bad 80s action movie? Because in a lot of ways, that's what they did. Now, I had said I think that the first act is actually a perfect superhero action movie first act. Is it Citizen Kane? No. You know, is it Gladiator? No, but I thought that they did a good job, and it just increasingly falls apart as it goes along. About it being an 80s movie, say what you will about the Captain Marvel movie, they made the most of it being the 90s, and there was great 90s music in this, in Captain Marvel. This movie had one 80s song that you sort of recognized at the party, and I sort of respect not overdoing it, but I was like, man, how about like the wardrobe montage, the little fashion show? Like, that's where you need Relax, you know, by Freddie Says Relax. I actually forget who that is off the top of my head all of a sudden, but you know, that song, Relax.
Frank Goes to Hollywood.
Frank Goes to Hollywood. Yes, thank you. Yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking. And before we get to Will Sterling, I just want to bring in from the chat our great friend, Raging Rhino, who says that they wasted, it went up and then it went down, that they wasted Cheetah just like they wasted Ares in the first movie. And our great friend Craig Robinson, checking in from across the pond, got to see it in the cinema mid-December in UK, and totally wasn't worth venturing out for the reasons Jeff said. I sort of split the difference. I saw it from the comfort of my own car and with some delicious popcorn, and I appreciated seeing it on the big screen for the stuff that I did have fun with. Now, Will Sterling, when we talk about movies, especially comic book movies, we always go to Will Sterling. How would you describe your reaction? What did you think of Wonder Woman 1984?
It was less than fine.
Oh,
Subfine.
subfine.
Ouch. Let me write that down.
What if you have to isolate? What were moments?
I feel like fine.
What were moments that were fine plus? Like, what were the most fine plus moments within the course of the whole movie?
Truthfully, I was really in the beginning. Like, it was silly and cheesy, and like even in the mall, like Jeff, you brought up a lot of good points, but I actually kind of liked the opening sequence with the games and stuff. And I was like, you know what? And like, I was having a terrible fucking week, and I was like really sad, and I was like, this just feels nice. Like, it feels nice to sit here on my couch, and I'm watching my projector, so it's like basically being at the movies because it's like 110-inch on the wall. And I was like, I just wanted to make me happy. And for the most part, I just kind of tried to gloss over the things that like technically bothered me all the way up until like Steve Trevor came back. And I was like, I don't even know how this makes sense, but he's funny, I guess. And he's here. And he did the clothes. And then they were in the airplane with the fireworks. And I think that was probably the last moment that I was like, okay. And then even the action sequence on the road, I was like, why does this not feel special or good? Like the way when the theme comes and she's the first time it fucking happens in the first one, she's fighting all those dudes and you're like, oh, yeah. And her on, like every action sequence except for the Ares one in the first movie is great. Even when you first get to the big on the road sequence, which takes like an hour, you're like, all right, she's on the car and she's running and stuff. And then it just sort of started to slip away. And then I started to question what I liked about it retrospectively, like while I was watching it. Like I was trying to give up. Why was I trying to like this? I was like, it's clearly not really very good anymore. And I don't know. The biggest thing that Raging Rhino said that, they wasted her. That's the thing. Christian, I texted you. It had Spider-Man 3 vibes because I was like, I think that if we tried to make one of these villains work separately, we could have easily had better movies on both sides of that. There's either one decent or great Cheetah movie or one decent or great Maxwell Lord movie. Instead, we have this subpar movie with both of them, which risks ruining both of them at the same time. So now you're like, okay, so we have to bring the Cheetah back in the third one because we know we fucked her up. But now it's awkward because her backstory is being a Fox early 2000s Marvel movie character. And that, making a wish on a rock to become like the premise of that. Some of these things that work in comic books, I guess, were just so, it felt like watching the first, not original. I mean, we all know the Roger Corman Fantastic Four is actually the best version at this point. But
Sadly, it is. Yeah.
The 2002 or whatever, whenever that one came out.
I think it's 2002. Yeah.
This feels like one of those movies. It was just not good.
Let me bring in a couple of comments from the chat, and I'll expand upon them. Our pal Sam Whitfield, who has told us that he likes the movie. I'm going to chat with him a little bit in a future episode, along with some other people who liked it a lot less than him. Sam likes that they brought Steve Trevor back, but he hated how they did it. And Craig Robinson, again, across the pond, agrees. Why not just magic him back? She already has her powers taken away. And it's, the explanation is like, oh, this guy is now Steve Trevor, and she sees him as Steve Trevor. And it just is like, I think I needed one more line explaining how this happened. Like, who is this guy? Yeah. Is this his great grand nephew, or, just anything? Right. Just give us a reason why it is this guy. And I can shrug it off, but it's just like, and he just sort of showed up one day. And I was like, okay, but they're going to pay that off. And they didn't pay it off. And what we were saying earlier when we were talking about the first movie, this feels like this movie isn't done by the same people as the first one. And that's the problem.
Not at all. Yeah.
It's all the same people, So I'm sorry. I think I talked over you a little bit, Will. What were you saying?
No. I mean, I was going to say, it was just strange. Like, there was that sort of story where it's like, my powers are going away. And when she kind of kept referencing it, I was like, but are they though? Like, there was never a moment where I was like, oh no, she's powerless. She's lost her power. I was like, then she gets the armor and she fights Cheetah and she wins. And I was like, I thought there was like a storyline where she lost her powers, but I guess she didn't. Or maybe
she renounced her. She said, I renounced my wish. Because you can just do that, not in the presence of anything. All you have to do is like, I regret touching that monkey paw, and it opens its hand.
I think that was the martini at that point that I just kind of was like,
Yeah.
Which is the whole movie over. The problem with the movie is as it goes, everything becomes, well, it's magic.
right.
Why is this happening? Oh, magic. Well, why is this happening though? Magic. All logic, even superhero internal logic in the movie was thrown out the window.
One of the biggest problems I keep forgetting to mention is that I hated that we introduced a god who creates this object that's the MacGuffin of the whole thing.
Correct.
And yet we never meet that god.
Right.
And it speaks to this exact magic issue.
Yes.
We've introduced gods. We've introduced their role in the world. We're reintroducing that concept, but being like, but gods are nowhere to be seen. What? Like, where?
Well, you also had a literal god at the end of the
we actually saw one.
Yeah, so Will, you said that there's a literal god at the end of the first one, and yeah, I did expect that was either something that we were going to get or possibly have set up, and it was another in many ways in which it didn't really deliver. Now I know Raging Rhino very invested in a lot of these DC characters, and he points out that the final Cheetah transformation is on screen less than 5 minutes. We never get a good look at her. And our pal Dominicus Saxon talks about how this wasn't lightning in a bottle like the first one. That was flat out amazing. This is very much, not that. Why doesn't she ask for his name at the end of the movie? The guy who was Steve Trevor, and I guess that reveal could have been somebody cool or something. But to Will's point earlier, I think Superman 2, I'm talking about the Richard Donner Superman 2, is definitely flawed in some ways. Whichever cut you're watching, there's still things about it that don't work. But when he gives up his Superman powers, he's not Superman anymore because he gets his ass kicked in that bar, and there's not that moment where Diana is like, oh, I'm still fast, I'm still strong, but I'm not as special. And I thought that's why the armor was set up, was like, I'm going to need this armor because I'm not tough anymore.
Right. But she only puts the armor on after she's back at full power.
And Jeff, I wanted to let you expand on that a little, because I guess the armor, is that from the Kingdom Come storyline, and I want you to talk a little bit about the movie in general beyond the armor.
Yeah, the look of it, I guess, was designed by Alex Ross for the Kingdom Come miniseries, and I think he's been talking about how he didn't get paid. He's a little PO'd.
All right,
he didn't get a check.
Just talk to Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko's estate.
Exactly. Yeah.
Talk to Bill Finger. No one gets paid. So Alex, you're just gonna have to join the club. The greatest in comic books never got paid. Stan only got paid because he continued to work with the company. Stan wasn't getting paid other than the fact that he was there as like some degree of a producer. But anyway, so talk about the armor and then the film as a whole.
One day I saw the Hulk climbing on the wall, and he wasn't getting paid by another spider, and I thought, I also wouldn't get paid. So,
yeah, apparently, not to get too inside on it, but DC movies used to pay much better to creators than Marvel movies until recent times. So once they got rid of Paul Levitz as the publisher of DC, things started to go downhill. That's what I've heard. But that's a little kind of off topic. But yeah, I'm glad that there was some time for the fervor over the movie to calm down so I could look at it with fresh eyes. And the movie's actually gotten worse the more it passes in my brain. Like at first I thought it was a dumpster fire, and now I realize it's like a dumpster fire, but somebody took a big industrial fan and put it over top of the dumpster, and flaming garbage is just going all over the place. Like the movie is so scattershot. There's no it feels like a movie made by committee. And so I almost think what happened, like you were saying, it is the same creators that did the last movie, but now more people are involved and more people have opinions on the script and the direction of the movie. And it just feels really like it was just done. It feels very corporate. Like if you look at the worst Marvel movie, let's say it's Captain Marvel, because it is. At least Captain Marvel was just mediocre bad. Like you could tell they were trying, but it's just kind of mediocre and it's not really offensive. This movie was try hard. Like I could just feel everybody working so hard to make such a massive disaster. It was really sad. Like I was cringing for the creators, like, and Jeff Johns, who's a comic book writer that I know Will's familiar with. Great comic book writer. I love his stuff. He's involved in the writing of these movies, a lot of these movies, and he still is working on the movie somehow, even though everyone he's involved with is a complete bomb. Well, except for Captain Shazam, which was again mediocre, but it did well.
Yeah, even his TV writing is not good either. And I'm like, how do you not know how to do this?
Yeah, this could be a whole sub conversation if we're going down that rabbit hole, but yeah, it's a real disappointment.
Well, it's funny because you use the turn of phrase that they, that they try hard to make a bad movie, and that's when I'm like, oh yeah, this is Die Hard 2. You know, Wonder Woman 2017 is Die Hard. This is Die Hard 2, where you're like, wait a minute, what are they doing? Like, why?
Yeah,
and I'm gonna just say I don't know where this is in the character's backstory, but I hated that she could fly because I didn't think she could fly, and if she can fly, why does she not fly in either Justice League or Batman vs Superman? Because I'm like, it's like I don't like when the Hulk flies. I like when you give me the excuse that he jumps really far. I'm like, all right, that I'll buy. Jessica Jones can't fly, she can just jump. And I'm like, oh, she's like laying down, she's like body surfing on, and you guys mentioned it earlier, the airplane with the fireworks and the clearly edited in there, oh, it's the 4th of July. Really, everyone in the museum was working on the 4th of July. Everybody was working on the 4th of July. Also, and my wife was the first one to catch this, everyone's wearing jackets earlier in the movie. Have you ever been to Washington, D.C. in July?
Oh, yeah, that's true.
It's like 110 with 1,000% humidity. Nobody's wearing a jacket.
I will say,
go ahead.
Maybe I don't remember how boozy I was at the moment, but when I realized that was how they turned it into the invisible jet, I did go, oh, that's kind of cool. I don't know why. I forgot that they were going to try to find justification for it and wasn't expecting it whatsoever. And then when it went invisible, I was like, oh, the invisible jet. Right. But it didn't anger me.
I read an interview with Patty Jenkins, and there was a couple of things she talked about. One was the invisible jet and how they just came up with the inspiration of being like, well, Themyscira has disappeared, so because she's the daughter of Zeus, she should be trying to use that power. And they were like, it was such an aha moment for them. So I do agree that was clever. And then the other thing that it talks about is how, and this was, I think I read it before, or I don't remember when I read it, but I read a whole thing about how she was so confident about the third act fight this time. She was like, yeah, I know a lot of people didn't like it, and I wasn't happy about it last time. And it's just like, really? You liked this one? Like the one where you're like, here, I watched this really good show called Game of Thrones, and what they did was turn everything really dark and then said a bunch of action was happening during that time, and everyone just had to believe them. So let's do that. Okay.
Yeah. It's I agree that the third act is not strong. I just want to bring in a couple of other comments from some of our same friends. I think that they just popped up. So so Raging Runner says they mentioned the Duke of Deception, a very obscure DC movie, but they needed to do more with it. And sort of the conversation about the behind the scenes, the biggest villains in the DCEU are Warner Brothers executives. That is a strong statement, but not necessarily wrong. And making the point that he likes Jeff Johns, but he often takes a long time to set up a small payoff. And then Craig Robinson points out that he thinks she flies in the Justice League animated stuff, but agreed the flying was difficult to like, even if it was Donner inspired. The tagline for the Richard Donner Superman was, "You will believe that a man could fly." This movie, I could not believe that a woman could fly. No. I did not buy it for even a second or a half second. I do agree that it's cool that we got the invisible jet. I like that they gave an explanation for it, because to me, Wonder Woman is one of the characters on Super Friends. And that's how I grew up with her. That's what I knew. I didn't even watch the Linda Carter show. I'm old, but I'm not that old. So I always think of her as hey, where's that invisible jet? I love the invisible jet. So I was glad that we got it. They gave a decent explanation, but then flying through the fireworks, and I'm like, wait, they're flying to the Middle East in that plane? And where was that plane that she had keys to the hangar? Is it it's like, how about a line of dialogue? Well, because I work at the museum, I have keys to the Air and Space Museum. Something.
It was fueled. It was fueled at the
First
museum.
of all, it was fueled before they left. Second of all, you'd have to refuel that plane before you could get to the Middle East because those aren't long haul flight planes. So it's just like, if you why you put yourself in these situations that you don't have to, where everything that you're pretending to like work doesn't work. It just is. They did it throughout the movie. There was never anyone to be like, hey guys, you know how none of this makes sense, right?
Wow. That's when you need Will's guy in the back of the room. Like, yeah, this is cool. But here's one thing. Sam points out that when they showed the invisible jet, he thought that's it. But I love Raging Rhino's comment, which is, this was the best use of the invisible jet I've ever seen, but I still think it's fucking stupid.
I will say that scene had the only good line of the movie, the only good dialogue, which was Chris Pine's character saying, "Well, shit, Diana." Like that was when she introduced him to the concept of radar. That was actually a good line. That was the only time I thought the dialogue was clever in the whole film.
That was funny because it's like, what's my and to me it was like, what's my fucking purpose now? And I'm like, well, I don't even know why you're in this movie outside of seeing Chris Pine and having that name. Like, there was no need for him to Jeff's point earlier, where it's like, this dude she knew for 6 weeks and it's been 60 years. It's like, I think you'd probably remember him and it'd be, a very important moment in your life, obviously, but she's got to fuck some other people in between then. You know what I mean? Like,
nope.
Girls don't even matter. Go back to the mascara. Who knows? Like, there's no way that it's just Steve 60 years later.
Look, I mean, I figure in the what, like 70 years between movies, there should have been, just an endless string of D and V in her life and just, anything in between. I mean, Diana's out in the world.
You don't understand true love.
Live your life.
This is
What's
the problem.
that?
You don't understand true love. That's the point.
That's true.
Yeah.
I absolutely.
But the problem is they made Steve Trevor the hero of both movies. It's like, he's the hero of this movie. He's the one who basically sacrifices himself again to get her to do what she needs to do to move her character forward. So it's very patriarchal, I think.
Kind of backward. Also, Jeff, I don't know how much you read of Rebirth. Greg Rucka's run on Wonder Woman, 5 or 6 years ago now, had just a tremendously original, very interesting take on Cheetah and the relationship between Barbara and Diana and the god, like who's created her and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, this is fucking amazing. Because there is that element, like an invisible jet, to Wonder Woman's villains being very silly. Like the giant, what's giant lady's name?
Giganta.
It is something like Giganta.
I mean, comics are silly inherently, but there's like a special silliness that, like, reading that, I was like, oh, the cheetah lady fucking makes total sense. And in this movie, it's like, I'm sorry that my papers are everywhere. And I was like, oh, Jesus.
Yeah, and nobody said, so you're just doing Michelle Pfeiffer from Batman Returns.
Right, exactly.
Like, no one said that.
I thought it was She's All That or whatever the movie is, where she takes off with Freddie Prinze Jr.
Yeah, where's Freddie Prinze Jr.?
You let your hair down. You're hot now.
Yeah,
the guy ignores her in the beginning. Like, she's got shit everywhere. She's like, hey, I know your name. We're friends. He's like, don't talk to me. 2 scenes later, oh, your ass is no longer covered by that jacket. Hey, how can I help you? Like, come on.
Yeah, all of a sudden, Gilly from SNL is supposed to be hot, and I do think that she did a good job especially in the first act. I mean, especially with what she was given, and I thought she was believable in the second act. And then, again, it was just like, they didn't need her in the movie. And when Will and I were trading messages, just the insight of comparing it to Spider-Man 3, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man 3, not the one we don't have yet. And it was just like, why is Venom in this movie when you already have Sandman? You have Thomas Hayden Church as Sandman, and you need Topher Grace as Venom. And you didn't, I mean, that movie wouldn't have been great, but it would have been better. And I think that this movie should have focused on one thing or the other. And we haven't talked that much about him, but I do want to talk about Pedro Pascal, who now I officially prefer him with the helmet on. I had a lot of trouble watching him in this movie, and
which is tough because he's basically in every scene of the movie. I mean, he's almost got. I mean, he may have more screen time than Diana has.
he's again better in the first act, and then as he goes along, and I'm like, so he's got to touch people, but then he doesn't have to touch people, and they couldn't make up their mind. Was that supposed to be a Ronald Reagan lookalike, or just random, like, oh, Mr. President, President Stevenson, or President, President, not real president? And I'm like, he kind of looked like Reagan, but he didn't sound like him. I'm like, which one would go one way or the other? If you
I thought it was Reagan, a Superman 2 thing where it was just like a generic U.S. president, but I agree. There was some confusion.
They were going for, and they didn't do any of this well. It's also one of the reasons for it is like, why is this in the 80s? This like Reaganism, capitalism, like trickle down economics thing, which I have my opinions on, of course, but they didn't even really like put a shoulder in either way. They were like, I mean, there were some bad guys in the 80s, like Maxwell Lord, who totally changes his mind in the end because he's a kid, and like
who he had the whole time.
But what?
He had that kid the whole time. Nothing changed with his relationship with his son, except that we saw that when he was a little kid, his mom wasn't nice to him either, which apparently he had forgotten. So we needed to have the whole experience in one montage at the end to set up the backstory of the character we're now done with.
It was like they wanted to make a point about Reagan, but were not ballsy enough to actually make the president Reagan. Like, at least in the weird Watchmen world, it's like, look at Nixon, he's the president somehow still.
Right.
Okay, that's fucking Richard Nixon. I guess that makes sense. But I have a theory now, as I've been thinking about it. The movie was originally supposed to come out last Christmas. Then it got pushed to the summer. Then it ended up actually coming out this Christmas. The way the movie feels like from like script to completion is like they actually hadn't shot anything by last Christmas. And they were like, oh, fuck, we got to put this movie out like in a couple of days. Let's just kick it to the summer and get the wheels going on this thing. And then the global pandemic hurt, and they were like, we get 6 more months. And then they released it. Like, this was their senior project they rushed in a year.
Yeah, and the irony is Patty Jenkins was the person who asked them originally to hold it off.
Yeah.
So they wanted to put it out the previous summer. I forget what year now. So summer of 19. And she said, no, let's wait. And then she regretted, this is even before pandemic, she regretted that she waited. Like, I bet you really regret it now.
Yeah.
But
look, there's an important, if you want to make the statement about capitalism, especially American capitalism in the 80s, I mean, we all grow up with Back to the Future, the original, and how beloved it is. But the way that movie ends, when he ends up, as the title implies, back in the future, and he's in this nicer house with, like, he's got a nice truck now, like, the rest of the world is like, no, this isn't a good thing. This isn't what's supposed to make you happy. And only in America do you think that way. And of course, I never thought anything of it. And it's just sort of that ending of Back to the Future is viewed around the rest of the world as in, like, yeah, this is, so you could have really had something important to say, but I don't think there's anything important anywhere in this movie. And he just, like, and look, it's a superhero movie. Of course, you have very cartoony performances. I mean, Willem Dafoe as Green Goblin just couldn't be more over the top, but it works in the first one, and this is just, I'm like, oh no, Mando, come on. This is not the way. There
were parts of his performance that I actually really liked. I think just because they just hit so deeply into the fucking absurd and crazy. We're like, and he just like starts losing his mind. I was like, I don't know, there's something entertaining about this. Like, for whatever reason, sometimes it's very fun watching actors who are 110% committed to something that is fucking bad, and you're like, oh, you didn't know. Okay, like we're not.
Yeah, John Travolta in Battlefield Earth is an amazing instance of what you're talking about, and obviously Xenu gave him the strength to perform in that film, but yeah, I don't know. I didn't think that I would bring up Battlefield Earth. Now I have to think about which one of these movies is better, but. And I think that's really what the problem is that it's just disappointing because the character is so good. But now this is 2 duds in a row that she's shown up in, because Justice League even if you add another 2 hours to it and you make it dark and mysterious, and oh my God, Batman's going to say fucking she's going to be in 2 bad movies in a row now. And she's so great. And whatever people think of Batman vs Superman, what nobody ever said was like, the movie was pretty good, but then Wonder Woman showed up and it was trash. People who didn't like that movie would say how much they liked her in Batman vs Superman. Like, yeah, we could have used more of her, and she was great in her own movie. And I don't know. I mean, what do we think the problem was? Was it too ambitious? Is it what Will's saying, Jeff Winstead, that they tried to pack too many things into it? Or what do you think the fundamental problem is with this movie?
Script. I mean, it's really just about the script. I mean, I kept watching the movie thinking, I wish the plot of this movie was different. Like from the outset, like when they're showing the games, for instance, and young Diana gets thrown from her horse and she looks and she sees what I thought was like a cave. It ended up being like a tunnel for a shortcut. I thought this would be a great movie if she goes into this cave and it's some unknown Amazonian threat that the Amazons had buried, and this becomes the plot of the movie. Like that's a better movie already.
For sure.
Just anything else but this plot. I don't
like
know
if it had been that stone in the cave, like the stone that sees it in 1984,
and better beginning.
Even though they're fun, you're like, technically, then you think back on it, like I was enjoying them. Now I'm like, why are these here? Other than to illustrate, she's like, I learned this lesson as a little girl, and I was like, don't cheat. Yeah, I think
And did you learn the lesson? Because you're crying at the end of the movie because you don't understand the lesson that we're told that you're getting the first of the movie.
Right.
Just really strange. So I think it's mostly mostly script. But then I got to be honest, even when you get to the directing phase, even if you don't like Zack Snyder's style, when you watch those movies, there's I'm not a huge fan of Man of Steel, but there's an artfulness to the directing that this just doesn't have.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing about this where you think, and I was saying earlier, Will, like, is there any scene in this movie where you want to go back and watch because it was such an awesome scene? No, not like the first one where she comes up out of the trench. Like, there's no equivalent here. And I feel like, so I don't know. I guess it all starts with script, but beyond that, just everything fell apart. The only good thing about the movie, I think, is both Chris Pine and Gal Gadot are likable.
Yeah.
You want to watch them in something better than this.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I would watch her as Diana. I'll usually use the example of, reading the phone book. I mean, if that's what they want her to do. She's very engaging. She does a great job with the character. Jeff DeRay, do you think script is the problem? I mean, obviously it starts there, but what sort of compounds why it doesn't work? Is it the fact that in the script there are the 2 villains? And before you answer, Raging Rhino has the thought that Barbara just uses the stone to become Cheetah and you get rid of Max Lord entirely. I mean, that would certainly work. But Jeff, what do you think?
Well, again, I think so. My assumption is that because she had such great success with the first Wonder Woman, everybody, it was very laissez-faire this time. Like, oh yeah, do whatever you want, Patty Jenkins. You go. You know how to do this. And I feel like that kind of thing is what leads someone to start having too insular thinking. And that's when you end up with like a lack of that collaborative art that you maybe were seeing. Like even Themyscira in the first one, when it's more CGI, which I never prefer, it actually felt more reflective of some paradise that doesn't exist anywhere on man's earth. You watch this one and you're like, oh, the woods somewhere in Atlanta. Cool. Like, what the fuck? Like the lack of that sheen, it speaks to the lack of like, oh, this no longer feels like it looks at one point like you're like, oh, is that like Runyon Canyon? Like where you're riding the horses? It just doesn't look like it's some magical island that has been completely untouched by like the pollution of man, right? That's what Themyscira is supposed to be in my mind. As far as like the movie itself, because you're just going like, yeah, whatever I think works. It's like the same thing when you're talking about Jeff Johns. I don't know. I can only make assumptions, but I feel like a guy like that's like, no, say the words I wrote, instead of allowing these people who are trying to like inhabit these characters come up with words that they think work better for these situations. Like when there's a more collaborative process, you get better characters. Look at no further than Thor Ragnarok. All you'll ever hear Hemsworth say is how Waititi wants to have a oh, you think that's a good line? Let's use your line. Let's try it your way. There's like anytime you hear this collaborative process, we're getting better films. And I'm not saying that wasn't here. My suspicion is it wasn't, because I don't hear it and because I don't see it.
Yeah, and a lot of times your good movies split the difference. Let's film it my way, and then you know, let's do one or two where we try some alternate lines or even just, you know, some different emotion in the scene. Will, what I wanted to ask you was, Jeff coming from the point of view that maybe they were a little bit more laissez-faire and let her do what she wanted, Patty Jenkins, I mean, do you think that the opposite is possible, that because the first one was this behemoth, that everybody at Warner Brothers is like, yeah, but we have a say. We want this, we want that. Do you think that the movie got noted to death in terms of, you know, just, you know, it not being as much as she wanted? Or where do you think that the problem most likely lies, sort of at the, you know, behind the scenes level, not the actual script writing, but here's what the movie needs to be from a Warner Brothers standpoint?
I think the interesting thing is, like, if there's any movie that has clearly been noted to death, it's the theatrical cut of Justice League. It's noted so far as to remove like 80% of it and reshoot it with another dude. And then you see that and you're like, this is fucking terrible. It's true. And it is only 2 hours long because somebody like forced it to be two. Like, yeah. I love DC characters. I want to love these things as much as I can. I think the thing about this is it's just not good. So like, I don't think it was noted to death. I think that people were just like, I mean, I think she had creative agency, but I do, again, it goes to show that, like, I don't think Jeff Johns is a particularly very good screenwriter at all. His heyday of comics is pretty much well behind him. I'm not saying he can't do good things again. It's just, this is not his medium. Like, I used to think about wanting to write comics, and the more I read comics and the more I try to, like, you know, work in screenwriting and I'm writing a book, like, I'm like, I don't actually think I would be a good comic book writer because I just don't live in that space. So like, maybe, but I don't know. I just think that, I think Jeff is right that it's just a bad script, because to me, I'm like, I look at this and the four of us can be like, wouldn't it be more interesting if like she bumped into the god or the tomb of the god in the very beginning where she found the stone, and then we go back to the stone and you're like, oh, and it turns out that's the god that they mentioned later and turns her into Cheetah. You're like, yeah, that sounds right. Like, well, we're not going to do that because that makes sense.
Now you're getting somewhere. Oh no, that's the wrong way to go.
Yeah. I was thinking like in the 80s, and then like, actually Steve is a dream man and he possesses a body, and then like, it feels like you asked your 10-year-old to write the sequel and they just laundry listed ideas and you were like, fuck it, let's go for it.
Yeah, Will, we already referenced your guy in the back of the room who's like, one thing, and makes the notes. Do you think that maybe that guy was out that day and his cousin was there, who's the guy who's like, yeah, look, you have it. It makes sense. But here's the thing. And then he throws in all these ideas that actually make it terrible. So he's the opposite of your guy. I feel like that guy got, you know, was like, no, you guys have a good script. But instead of having it make sense, what if it doesn't make sense? Do you think that would be better?
That sounds very, very possible.
And bringing it all together, and back to what Jeff said about making it more of a collaborative effort, like when they were in the plane and she was saying to Steve, I love how you fly. It's your superpower.
Right.
And no one said, that's a really hokey line. Like, I can see Jeff Johns totally wrote that line. I 100% guarantee it. And somebody should have said, that's great for comic books, Jeff.
Yeah.
But this isn't going to work on the screen. And nobody did. And sort of getting back to the flying thing. So yeah, that is the origin of how she flies in the comics, at least in the comics from 86, the George Perez run. She glides on wind currents. So she doesn't fly the way Superman does, like from the chest, like propelling himself. She flies in these wind currents. And so, you know, I can see that coming a mile away when she had that line to Steve, because I read the comics, but it still didn't work in the context of the movie. And also, as Jeff was saying earlier, in the continuity of the other three movies we've seen her in, where she doesn't fly at all.
there was a narrative about this movie that I kind of stayed away from because I didn't see it right away. I know it was on HBO Max, at least here in the US. It was there on Christmas Day. I didn't see it until the 30th because I went to the drive-in. So I kind of, steered clear of it. But there was a very real conversation happening that her and Steve Trevor being together is actually a very rapey sort of encounter, and there's not any consent. And we could make light of it because it's a guy, and you're like, yeah, but look at her. And honestly, the guy that this is, who when we see him at the end of the movie, if you like whispered to him, like, you banged that girl, he'd probably be like, oh, I did. You got to figure he's okay with it. But to talk about it in not such literal terms. And I hate the way people throw the word problematic, but is there any question while they're writing this script of like, wait a minute, but she's not really having sex with Steve Trevor, and this guy's being possessed right now, so it's not really up to him. And we ran into this when I was doing the after show for Legion on AfterBuzz at the second season. There's like a mind control thing, and there were some very, very different opinions. Myself and any other men that appeared on the show were like, we're not even going to let ourselves have an opinion. But my pal Zia, who's on this show a lot, she was just like, no, it's fine. And other women felt like, no, it's not fine. And I'm like, great. I still don't have an opinion on that series because of that, because it's 2021 and I don't need to have an opinion on that. But I do defer to our resident feminist, and this is a sort of a gender fluid issue. It is a male character.
Talking about Jeff Winstead, right?
Jeff
Winstead,
Christian, is our resident feminist.
It's definitely creepy. I mean, you got to admit it's creepy.
But Will,
creepy, by the way.
Will, was this something you thought about when you were watching it, or was it just like you saw people talking about it and like, oh, okay, I mean, I guess maybe, or is it something you thought about at all? Basically, is what I'm asking.
I guess I hadn't really considered it. I think Jeff brought up the most important point when it comes to the feminist argument, which is that Steve's sacrifice gives her the reason to. You know what I mean? There's still that like reliance on a man in that way to push her to the understanding of the theme and then be able to save the day. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have any romance or that like a love story. You can still have these kind of things. And yes, like a true partnership does oftentimes trade in those things. But it is weird that he was brought back in this movie for no other reason other than she purely pined after him, pun intended. Yeah.
You're on the right Star Trek.
Like Jeff said, for 60 years, to believe that she never had any other relationship with anybody, and then him being like a ghost version, like in another dude's body, and then being like, "Hey, I have to go," and now that I can go, it gives you your powers back. Like she has no agency. You know what I mean? She's totally powerless emotionally, not even just physically, without him. You know, she's in hiding, she's saving some people, but she can't save the day until there's Steve Trevor, and I think that that's just kind of silly. Like when they were like, "Hey, we're bringing it back in the sequel," I was like, "Cool, so we just undo that wonderful sacrifice?" Like, no, well, he's gonna make the same exact sacrifice in this one, so it's like Home Alone 2. You know, it's like the bucket of goo versus a bucket of hammers. It's kind of apples to oranges. It's like it was such a stupid thing to bring him back outside of trying to make money with his name on the billboard. Like there was no reason to have him in this movie. She should have the agency to make all these fucking decisions and revelations on her own.
And I hope that they never try to. And I really like Chris Pine. I like him as Captain Kirk. But
in it,
I don't ever want to see him again. Like I don't need it
forever.
It's done now. Like we don't have it. But Jeff Duray, if I'm wondering, and let's go hypothetical, if you were not in a committed relationship and you awoke mid-possession and you retained your faculties and you were in the middle of, Diana Prince, would you be like, no, this is wrong, stop it? Or would you be like, hey, this ain't so bad?
So if I'm going with your example, I'd probably freak out because I would be returning to consciousness mid-coitus and would be like, wait, who's on top of me? Right? Because I don't know, like I would just be like, what the fuck's happening?
You could be afraid. You'd be afraid that it's Kristen Wiig. I get it. That's fair.
Yes, exactly. No, I mean, obviously Gal Gadot's hot, and we have this whole thing of like, yeah, I wish my teacher would touch me. But it's just like, what? Like, come on. It is ridiculous, and it's also one of the things that I've always thought is like, it's just unfair to this guy. This guy that we barely know, who has, from any scene we've ever actually seen him in, seems like a really good, genuinely good person.
Yeah,
and we're just like, yeah, fuck your life. She needs to like bang it out for a while. And
Diana doesn't give a shit. She never expresses any concern for the dude the whole movie, and that's the problem. Like that's the crux of the issue, and what makes it so creepy.
If we saw Diana go out on a date and like, you know, get frisky and then just be like, okay, now leave. Like, I'll call you a cab. I would be more like, yeah, girl power. Like, do your thing. Like, live your life. That would. And then if she did this thing, even if then it came up and it was like, oh, this was the true love of her life, I would be more on board, because I'd be like, oh yeah, you know, she's been going around, but she never really connected with anybody like she did with first person that she met. I could understand that, but the fact that she looks like she's basically like, I'm the world's most beautiful spinster. Oh, he came back. Like, fuck off.
Yeah, the cat lady at the end of the block is hot. I don't understand.
Frankly, I would be down for like and not even for whatever. I think a much more interesting story would be if she had a relationship with Barbara, and that somehow finding out that she had these powers was the betrayal that created animosity between them. Like, how could you fucking hide this from me? We've been building a life together. And then we don't have to do the stupid, oh, you put your hair back down and now you're hot and guys like you. Like, stop.
That's the thing. Is like, see, that's the thing, is that Hollywood is always interested in grandstanding and telling you like how forward and progressive they're going to be. But when you actually say like, hey, a really fucking amazing storyline would be if Barbara and Diana had a relationship and this was the whole push for justifying like this whole thing, they'd be like, yeah, but I don't know if we could have like actually like a lesbian superhero movie. So we're just, you know what I mean? Like, that is an incredibly more interesting story that gives it so much personal stakes and actual emotional like depth, and fucking justifies a woman turning into a cheetah in a magic movie. Like, yeah, there's all these different things.
Yeah.
Great. But instead they're like, no, let's do dead guy. Let's do that again.
And instead they sort of, it's a minor subplot, but they have in New Mutants, they do have sort of the you know, burgeoning lesbian relationship, which, by the way, I was thinking about that as I was putting together my thoughts for this, that the way 2020 turned out, for me, far and away, New Mutants was the best superhero comic book movie of the year. Second ended up being Birds of Prey, which was the last standalone comic book episode that we did back in February of 2020.
Better than Wonder Woman 1984?
Yes. Here's the thing. Even if it was garbage, it would be better in that it's 90 minutes and not 2 hours and 40 minutes. So it doesn't waste your time. I do actually like it. It has similar problems in that it begins to fall apart towards the end. But there's things that I really like in the third act.
Would it have been better if Wonder Woman 1984 was Tenet, where it was the same forward as it was backwards? So even if you watch it a second time, you're like, oh, that's right. This was never good.
Yeah, well, Tenet was definitely not my favorite movie that I saw on a big screen in 2020. I liked Invisible Man more than that, you know. So, but I think that you know, this it's interesting to think about it, because my thought became, what do I like the least? Wonder Woman 1984, Suicide Squad, or Justice League? And I think Justice League.
Wow.
But this is close. And I would have to watch Justice League again, and I don't want to.
There's a feeling inside me thinking about all three of these, maybe it's because I've seen Wonder Woman the most recent. Like, that out of the three, like, I think I would still pick Wonder Woman 1984 as the best of those three. Because it's just like, at least it's bright and colorful, and it has a lot of Gal Gadot being Wonder Woman. Like, there's not enough of her in Justice League, and there's none of her in Suicide Squad. So and there's, outside of Will Smith, I like Joel Kinnaman, but he doesn't do enough. Like, I don't need I don't know.
Suicide Squad was boring. I would say, though, that specifically to a point Jeff made previously, I would, out of all of those movies, rather watch Superman first waking up and looking at the Flash while he's like running around super fast than any scene in any of the movies.
Yeah, right.
That's fair.
Even though it's just like ruined at the end, but that was a way more interesting scene than anything that happens in these.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think
I would
if I were
say,
ranking the
go
worst
ahead, Jeff
movies,
Winstead.
I would put Suicide Squad at the floor, and then this would be just above Suicide Squad is the worst of the DC movies. Just because Suicide Squad, I don't think the characters are as likable as the actors. You know, at least you can say Chris Pine and Gal Gadot are interesting to look at on screen.
And I do legitimately, I like Ezra Miller as Flash. I think that characterization of him, which may not be what you guys like because you like the comics, I felt like that worked in that movie.
Treated like Wally. Why do you think people like him? He's silly and fun.
Wally.
Yeah, and I know I've told you this, on text, but at least he can act, unlike the guy who plays the Flash on the TV show. So that's a leg up already.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I mean, but obviously, what we're overlooking is that, of course, Suicide Squad is great because it has the one true Joker that we've ever gotten in any movie, the best Joker that we've ever seen, of course, Jared Leto. So I don't even know why we're trying to compare that movie.
I can't wait to see more of him in Justice League. It's going to be so good. I'm going to be like fully erect the whole time.
Yeah.
I'm just saying I'll be excited, like I'll be sitting straight up in my chair.
We knew what you meant. Let's talk about a moment. My friend Nikki Bailey that I do a Star Trek Discovery after show with, she only liked the last 10 seconds of Wonder Woman 1984. And it's something that Dominicus Saxon mentioned that we would be remiss in pointing out, that the only really good part was the cameo at the end. And I think people that didn't like the movie did think that was a really cool reveal, that we got to see Linda Carter, who, of course, was TV's Wonder Woman in the 70s. Very cool that we got to see her. It's a nice moment. I don't know if it works from a storytelling standpoint. I don't know if it's setting something up. Like, are we going to get her in a third movie? But Will, what do you think of that? Or had you just already thrown up your hands at the movie and I don't even care what the post-credit scene is at this point?
I didn't even care. And they didn't do enough to make that armor and that character really mean. Again, we talk about God stories and all the stuff we could have done to make things make sense, that I honestly forgot what that person's name was. I don't know the comics so well to have memorized all these intricate Wonder Woman characters. So at the end, I was like, I don't know, who is that? I had to Google. I was like, Linda Carter, Wonder Woman, 1984. Like, oh, she's the lady with the armor. I was like, oh, okay. I guess she'll be in the next one. That's fine. Is she bad?
Yeah.
Is she a good guy? Why aren't they friends? Why is she
why is she hiding? Yeah.
Also, in 60 years, they never met up, despite the fact that Wonder Woman is not hiding her identity at all.
Right.
But,
well, and the thing though is and I don't know, outside of what I've seen her in these cameos and the similar DC shows on television, I don't know that Linda Carter is a phenomenal actress. So the idea that she would co-carry a whole third big budget movie alongside a fucking movie star is weird to me. I don't know.
I think our friend Ken, aka Coltrane, would say, "How dare you?" Except, of course, when he says that, it means you're absolutely right. I think
it just feels and this is probably kind of mean, and people would kill me for it, but it's it just feels like there's a TV actor in a big movie. It's weird.
Yeah, and as Sam says that Sam Whitfield, the Linda Carter is still gorgeous, but her scene felt cheap. Yeah, it was great to see her. I was very excited by that moment. What did you think, Jeff Duray?
I mean, it begs a big question for me of I had always been, and I guess I just don't know the rules, right? I assume that Themyscira, because of where it was and how it was located, protected them from time, right? The passage of time, so that all these women could basically be living for forever. But Linda Carter, living outside the world of Themyscira forever and never really apparently aging, but kind of aging, it begs the questions, right? So Diana grows up and then she becomes an adult woman. Everyone there's adult women, except for some of them seem somewhat older. So do they just age slowly? Do they not age at all? What are the rules? It just doesn't really make any sense. And I didn't need her to be there. I knew it was going to be her. I knew it was going to be Linda Carter. I knew it was going to be the lady with the stupidest set of armor that's ever lived, because all it was used for was to make her look like an angel when she lands. Like, literally, I watched that scene again. She breaks through the clouds, pulls up for a second so she could do a full angel stop, then goes back to diving down because that stop had no value other than to expose her to any enemy, like incoming mortar fire, whatever shit. It was just like, what is going on here? Because that was when the military base is full of people shooting guns at her, and she's like, let me just make myself a nice big target before I come down. And then she's wearing that suit of armor, and she's kind of flying but jumping. And then she hides herself in it so it can be torn to shreds, because apparently it's not actually that strong. And then she just sheds the wings because she never really needed them in the first place. So what the I don't know. There's just a lot of stuff. And so I didn't need Linda Carter. I've obviously never seen the movie. I think it's a nice nod. Again, if you watch this movie because you wanted to watch an homage to 80s movies, I think it's great. And I think this movie is probably great. If you wanted to watch this movie because you thought we were getting the next Wonder Woman movie, it sucks. And the more you break it down, the more you start to feel like, I was entertained when I first watched this. But the more I try to pick it apart, the more I'm like, oh, why was I entertained?
I don't even know if it's a great homage, in my opinion, to 80s movies, because as you were saying earlier, it feels like, remember when there was the brief spin-off of That 70s Show called That 80s Show, and all of the jokes and the trailers on TV were like, it's a cell phone, and it was like, what? Like, it's not a movie set during the 80s, which is how you should usually make period things. It's a movie about, look at how silly the 80s were.
Yes.
Which is not an homage. That's like a lampoon. So it doesn't feel authentic. It feels like this tongue-in-cheek joke that isn't actually funny. The whole time I was like, why is this in the 80s? Trump is alive now. If you want to make the same argument, just fucking do it now.
Right. Compare this to any random episode of Stranger Things where they do the 80s right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's no contest. Matter of fact, once they got past the mall scene, the movie needed not be set in the 80s at all. It never felt like it was 80s.
Outside of his wardrobe.
Outside of the wardrobe scene, which, by the way, unnecessary scene. Like, it wasn't even that funny, but from a storytelling standpoint, it wasn't necessary, because didn't he end up wearing the same outfit he had on the night before anyway?
Yeah.
So it didn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've had that fashion show scene so many times.
So you could have the joke later, right? Where he's like, my friends make fun of me for wearing this, but I think it's hot.
Exactly. That's right.
Right.
That's right.
But because I see it about twice a month because of my kids, there's a better fashion show costume try-on scene in Toy Story 3 when Barbie has Ken in the dream house. I've seen it 5 times in the last 2 months, so believe me, it's much better. But Will, Jeff Duray had a bunch of things that he was asking questions, but doesn't it ultimately come down to your usual answer of because comic books?
Kind of. For whatever reason, that justification works for me with the Aquaman movie, but it doesn't really work for this. Because you have Aquaman, you're like, this is also really fucking silly and technically, I guess not good. But every time I watch that movie, I'm like, this movie is a lot of fun. You know what I mean? With this, I wasn't like, well, at least this movie's a lot of fun. I was like, I don't actually know why any of this is happening. I never thought we'd be living in a world where the Aquaman movie was way better than this other Wonder Woman movie. But
as was Shazam, by the way, Shazam and Aquaman. And I referenced. Sorry, what were you saying, Jeff Duray?
I have an answer for both of those. There's hardly any action in this action movie.
That's true.
There's tons of action in those movies. There's 2.5 hours, and I can name 1.5 fights.
Yeah. That's the thing. At least those movies are, and that's what makes comic book movies to a certain degree. They're motivated. It's always what's the moment before? One scene has to lead into the next scene with justification. These movies are truly, they move through the scenes via fights. That's kind of should be half of the movie. That's what reading a comic book is. So the fact that we got to that big on the road sequence, and I was like, why doesn't this feel cool? I'm not really jazzed about this. It was
Yeah, and I referenced her earlier, and people who know myself and our pal Zia Anderson doing shows together know that she hated the Captain Marvel movie. After she saw this, she's like, "Oh my God, Captain Marvel is so much better than Wonder Woman 1984," and I didn't expect her to say that, but it does have a lot of action in it. It has some fun '90s nods. It does have Sam Jackson in it, so I didn't hate Captain Marvel like a lot of people.
I didn't
on
either.
here.
I don't know why people hate that movie so much. I enjoyed it.
It's just mediocre, I think.
I think
for me.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where Marvel had been knocking it out of the park. We had Infinity War. We were waiting for Endgame, and then this was supposed to join them together, and everyone was like, "Whoa, way to like dip the tone, Jesus."
I knew nothing about Captain Marvel, so I was just like, "Oh, this is all new information to me." But I do think that they did the '90s well. Sam Whitfield brings up in the comments I see here because it's one of my favorite shows of all time. The Americans is a great '80s series. I mean, yes, The Americans is a fucking hardcore drama, so it's hard to make them the same. But yeah, it's set in the '80s, and there's no moment where they're like, "Look at my fanny pack." You know what I mean? Like sometimes Reeves is wearing some silly fucking costumes, but you just put it in the '80s and then you forget about it. Like,
I just had like an epiphany from you explaining that, was because I made the comment before of like Diana's naivety was like a big fun in the first one, right? So they were trying to do Steve as the naive one of like, this is how the '80s work. Oh, fanny packs.
Right.
It just is like, yeah, but you've been in the world, so like chill, bro.
Yeah.
Like
Jeff Winstead, before I do want to catch up on some of the comments in the chat, but Jeff Winstead, before we go and do that, I wanted to give you a chance on any final thoughts, which could be about the cameo, just the movie in general, and what your lingering feelings are about Wonder Woman 1984.
I liked the cameo because I was probably the only one of the four of us who actually did watch the show as a child. So for me, it was fine.
That's about right. Yeah.
Beyond that, I think we mostly covered. I can't think of any final thoughts. I just thought they wasted the '80s potential. So I think
totally. And it's like good luck getting a DC '80s movie now because they burned through it.
Yeah.
Somewhere in here.
Hang on.
Go
Sorry.
ahead.
Was all of the characters are worse in the movie than they are in the comics. Like they ruined Max Lord. Like there's no reason this character should be called Max Lord. He was nothing like the character from the books. Steve Trevor's maybe the only character who was actually better in the movies than in the comics, as that guy's been a dud in the comics for 80 years now. But Cheetah also, as Will Sterling said earlier, was much worse in this than in the books. So it's almost like we've moved past the point where we say, yeah, but it's comic books. The comic books are better than some of these movies. And once you've seen once you've seen Endgame, like once you know there's a potential to do Avengers Endgame, is there really an excuse to say, well, it's just a comic book movie anymore? Like I think we've kind of moved past this where these things are much more sophisticated, and this movie just didn't live up to that, like what we were expecting from just a year and a half ago with the Marvel stuff.
Yeah, no. I think that makes sense. This goes back to our earlier conversation about consent. Raging Rhino wants to know: does that make Wonder Woman 1984 this era's Revenge of the Nerds? Because there is some very rapey content in a movie that is, in fact, a comedy. And later, Raging Rhino says that I haven't watched New Mutants yet, but I still expect it to be better than Wonder Woman 1984. Jeff Winstead, have you ever seen it? Because I know how much you like Cannonball, and I know what's going to annoy you about him. I can't remember if you've seen it or not.
No, I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, well, we'll as soon as he shows up on screen, you'll be like, oh, okay, this is what he was talking about.
It's the voice, right?
Yeah, it's a terrible accent. Craig Robinson says, I think at least Justice League still has those standout moments that you can go back and rewatch. I would need a list of those, but I think he's possibly right. Sorry, what were you saying, Will?
Those are the Zack Snyder, like the 20% or whatever, that's like the tunnel fight and stuff. I'm like, that's a fucking cool action sequence. I'm like, oh yeah, Zack shot that. Like all the silly shit in the beginning, garbage Joss Whedon stuff, all the reshot Cyborg stuff. You're like, what? And even the final battle, but like, I don't know, some of the little bits and pieces. I'm like, I'm rich is his superpower. I'm like, this is all great. Like there are moments in there, but all those moments were from the original trailer, and I'm like, this is the better part.
Raging Rhino, whom I believe saw Justice League theatrically 7 times.
That's right.
I believe he said that.
Well,
Justice League and Suicide Squad have watchable scenes and fun moments, and he puts Wonder Woman 1984 at the bottom of that. And he does agree that the Linda Carter cameo was just fan service. Can't imagine seeing her as a major character in another Wonder Woman movie. And speaking of another Wonder Woman movie, I know that Craig is a little worrying that they're so keen to rush out the third movie. I mean, they greenlit the third movie. I don't think that it's written. I don't know when that's going to happen, any of that. But I wonder what, no pun intended, sorry. I'm curious as to what the third movie is going to be and if the reaction to this is going to factor in. I don't know. I don't know what we're going to get. I'll as we wind down, I'll ask each of you what we're hoping for in a third Wonder Woman. The final comment in the chat from Raging Rhino. This film felt empty, but then again, the movie did warn us about the dangers of wishing for more. So he is not wrong. I'll start with you, Jeff Winstead. What would you most like to see in a third Wonder Woman movie? And you have more familiarity with the character. Who would you like to see in the movie? Whether it's an adversary or even an ally, what would you personally most like for a third Wonder Woman movie?
I'd like to see new screenwriters for one. And
that's fair.
Yeah, beyond that, I wouldn't mind seeing it set in modern times this time. Let's just go ahead and bring her up to date. As far as like bringing in another character from the comics, that's a good question because who's she have? Dr. Psycho? I can't think, Will, of anybody of a major.
Is there somebody that you would like to
Silver
see
Swan is a character.
Silver Swan. Okay. Will, is there somebody that you'd like to see from the comics make their way to the big screen?
That's the thing. Like again, I don't know them so well, but they're so silly. Like the cheetah really is. I think
she has a weak rogues gallery.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean,
Will, what you're saying is that she needs a male villain because obviously the female villains just aren't up to snuff. Is that what you're trying to say? Is that the statement that you're going to make in 2021?
Well enough outside of just having. I mean, I only picked up her book for Rebirth, so I've only been reading her like the last 6 years or so. And that's the thing, though, is I'm like, fuck, they burned one of the people who could have been interesting for a third movie or set up a storyline that then they could have continued later. Now it's like, well, we got 2 gone. They're going to try to work. I feel like the dangerous thing is they're going to be like, well, let's fix the cheetah story. I'm like, no, because now it's weird because we have to pretend like the last one like didn't matter. Like, just don't do it.
Yeah, I agree. And I have a similar thought for Captain Marvel 2, which I like, that should be set in the modern timeline. I don't want and here's what she was doing in 2003. I'm like, I don't care. Just, okay, you can have one flashback movie for a character and then that's it. Jeff DeRay.
It would be.
Yeah,
it would be
Jeff DeRay, what would you like from a third Wonder Woman? Are there characters that you know from, I know you've seen a lot of the animated movies. Is there anything in particular you want to see? It doesn't even have to be a character. What would you want from a third Wonder Woman movie, Jeff DeRay?
Immediate choke answer, male director. No, I don't even mean that, honestly. Because
no, of course not. No, because he's a great director. Yeah, I know.
I honestly don't care. But I would love to see I find the whole idea of the Greek gods being real and somehow existing in this world with these metahumans a fascinating potentiality for a greater DCEU. Like, what made Shazam more interesting was that you didn't have to be like, but why is there magic? Because they're like, yeah, there's magic. So let's just do more shit like that. I'd stop. Let's just sorry, I got a hungry dog in here with me. Let's just get. I'd rather them go bigger. I wouldn't mind seeing a lot more of the I'd rather just get the interesting guys, right? Like, fuck, why don't you just have if we could go back to the greater DCEU, the obvious most interesting storyline is the big fight with Apocalypse. right? Or
Dark
not
Side.
Apocalypse, Dark Side on
Yeah.
Apocalypse. So you have her be captured and be one of Darkseid's little female fighting force, right? The Furies or whatever they're called. Something like that is far more interesting. The same way there's the storyline where he captures Supergirl and then they have to like go get her. Anything with that is a lot more interesting because then you have her in fights where she can go all out, right? Like you don't feel like you can really show Wonder Woman because you're like, all right, we have to get all the way to the end of the movie for someone to be even potentially on par for her to really do a fight. Everything else is just going to be her punching people in slow-mo. Like I'd rather get to a point where we can really see this woman who has military training bust out some moves, right? Like get her in a big actiony fighty movie. I don't know. I don't know what it needs, but it needs a lot more zhuzhing.
Are any of you familiar with the character of Strife? Raging Rhino says they should use Strife from Brian Azzarella's run. I'm going to defer to Raging Rhino. If it's somebody that he thinks should be in a movie, I'm going to be like, you know what? If that's what he wants, it's probably going to be awesome. I don't know. Jeff Winstead, are you familiar with that character?
I don't really know anything from after 2011.
Okay, that's fair.
The George Perez run, like anything you want to pull from the George Perez
the post-crisis Wonder Woman.
The immediate post-crisis stuff, it's all good stuff. And Will, by the way, if you have you read any of the George Perez stuff, like the early stuff from like 87, 86? That's good stuff. Okay. I think you'd like that,
that's the same era as that Aquaman miniseries that you liked, right? That was post-crisis?
Yeah, that and the Man of Steel that John Byrne did. So it's in line with that,
I feel like what if they go to utilize a lot of that stuff, especially with Man of Steel and a couple things? Yeah. They just do it in a weird, in like the wrong way. Like for me, honestly, like her Rogues Gallery is not that exciting. The DC universe is pretty fucking big, so you could put anybody in that movie.
Sure.
Maxwell Lord is actually not that old of a character, and then only slowly became like a Wonder Woman bad guy, but was never really specifically like strictly Wonder Woman.
No, that was a weird choice for this.
Yeah. Just kind of like overall general bad guy in DC Universe that she snaps his neck in Crisis or Infinite Crisis. So like they just pick anybody. Like it's a shame. Dark Side. You know what I mean? Like let's just do that all like in a different way. I don't care. Like,
that's the fascinating thing because his name being Maxwell Lord just made me think that clearly this character was named in the 1940s. So I'm learning right now. Jeff DeRay, I feel like you were trying to say something a moment ago.
I had just had a thought about about the movies, but I'm like losing it because this dog is driving me crazy.
That's sorry. All right. No, it's no worries. We'll wind that down. Sam chimes in. I believe it was Sam who says they could use Star Sapphire from the Bruce Timm DCAU. So there's options. Let us know in the comments, or you can tweet at us and let us know your thoughts. Jeff DeRay, by having the hungriest dog, I will let you go first. If people want to keep in touch with you, at Jeff DeRay on Twitter and Instagram. But don't expect much. But you have tweeted in the last week. I've seen a few.
I've been tweeting. I'm tweeting. That's the only one I re-downloaded it because it was the one that I liked the least. So I thought it would be the least potentially addictive in terms of social media. I remember what I was going to say, which is I think the way to save the DCEU is stop trying to make a DCEU and just start making some Elseworld DC movies, like some standalone type stuff, a la the Joker. It's so much more interesting.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, I think that they're not as interconnected as they had planned, and I guess we'll see from there. Well, thank you, Jeff DeRay. As always, we appreciate it. Give our best to MJ and everyone over there. I will let you go because dog feeding time. You gents know how important that is. Jeff Winstead, if people want to keep in touch with you, if for people watching, they can see it on the screen. But for our audio listeners, how do they keep in touch with you?
I'm on all the stuff at Jeff Winstead, and haven't been very active lately, but I'm on there. So
yeah, and if they want a great independent comic book series, Jeff has created The Alternate. 5 issues or 6. I'm sorry, I forgot.
6 issues.
6 issues.
Yeah.
And you can get that on Comixology. We've all ventured into the world of the alternate, and I hope that everybody checks it out. And
Thanks. And you can also get it on Kindle for Amazon now.
Okay. And hopefully one day we're all talking about how much we love the movie version of the alternate. Will Sterling,
Listen, I'm looking
when and
so.
where can? Well, yeah, and obviously the lead in that film will be the one and only Mr. Will Sterling of the Will Tourage. Will, where can people find you?
At Will Sterling _ Twitter and Instagram. I am active, but people don't always like what I have to say. So follow me, unfollow me, send me mail. Look at almost nude photos of me on Instagram. You know,
that's true. Yeah, I do get comments from people sometimes talking about the racy photos that Will posts. And if you want to get in a fight with Jeff Duray, it's not even really a fight, but if you want to have a back and forth where it's not a fight, it's a disagreement. If you want to disagree with Jeff Duray, he will definitely disagree with you. People in the chat right now, he's disagreed with in the last week. So it's always great. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. And if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the Bladtcast YouTube channel. We have this show. We have Marvel Movie Talk, which will be this Friday, the 15th, because for the next 9 weeks at least, it'll be the WandaVision after show. We're going to talk about that. Very excited about what will certainly be a very unique entry from the Marvel universe, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You can find that show. And we have our political show, which is now called Biden Time. Biden Time. And riding with Biden. That's another idea. So you can find those shows there. But of course, this one, Bladtcast.com, Bladtcast. Thank you to our Jeffs, Duray and Winstead and Jeff Sterling, all the Jeffs that we had today. And we appreciate everybody in the chat. We will see you next time on the Bladtcast.